Hello, welcome. Thanks for clicking this button and joining us today for this message. Pastor KJ is here continuing our journey through the book of John. And for you to stay connected with everything that is happening here at the church, you can just go under this video and there's the newsletter and you can ask for prayer and get to know everything that is going on here. So check that out. And after the message, Pastor Dudley and I are going to be here talking with KJ about all the topics that he's going to bring up. So stick around and here we go. Enjoy.
All right, so it is really good to be here, and I'm excited about today's passage because there's this idea of coming home, this place that it brings us to like the centerpiece of the things that God is doing here in John chapter 6. Again, like our church is doing a sermon series on the book of John. We began at the beginning, and it's going to be done by Easter. And so to slowly just go through and see what the author of John, who is John, is doing and the intent that he has behind it. Something that I think I'm coming to a spot in as far as who I am, just going through the sermon as a person, or a sermon series as a person, is I tend to forget that God is pursuing, that the character of God is the character of pursuit. Like the whole story of the biblical journey is God chasing after people. And I think it's very easy to forget these things because it often feels kind of like I am in the seat that I control all things and I am going after God, trying to find him, trying to catch a glimpse of God, trying to just see him passing by super quick, and if I can just grab onto him or own him just for a second, or it feels like this proverbial journey of hunger, and can God just give me the tiniest little speck of, are you out there? Yes, I am. I'll take it and grab onto it. That I tend to forget that God actually is the God of pursuit, that the whole gospel journey and the story of the Bible, it isn't a God who's trying to play hide and seek, hoping that you catch a glimpse of him. It's like God is on full display, coming here, trying to show you, saying, do you see me? Just beautiful, extravagant things that it seems like God's doing, but people who have eyes do not see, or ears they do not hear, or like it's that whole thing that Jesus often is talking about. And so this journey in the book of John is just like, wow, I have forgotten that the God that I'm seeking is actually seeking me. Um, and there's this head shift that happens that's just like, oh, then just find me. Just find me, instead of this hungry, desperate, active pursuit in the swamps. The overall journey, I think, that I've gone on through this book has put the heart that I have kind of in this posture of, I'm just dying to see his face. The Hebrew people in the Old Testament had that same kind of heartbeat of just like, man, I just want to see God's face. I just want to see him. And there are all these prophecies in the Old Testament by the prophets that talk about a day that everything is going to be okay, and that God's boots are going to be on the ground, and he will be here, and the signs and the symbols that the prophets have done in the Old Testament, and the signs and the symbols that the prophets had done in the Old Testament are incredible. I've been just like all over the place exploring the different things that the prophets have been doing. I mean, I forgot how incredible the prophets are. These human beings that the presence of God would come upon them, and they caused the earth to stop spinning. They brought people back from the dead. incredible things. I was like, oh my gosh, how did I forget this? But all the things that the prophets are doing are pointing towards and proclaiming there's this presence of the Holy Spirit that's going to be on the ground. Someday, all of this will be embodied by flesh and bone and blood. And you see what I'm saying? And so the Hebrew people kind of grasped onto this and said, I'm just dying to see his face. So today's passage is in John chapter 6, and the story is the feeding of the 5,000. But before we get there, here's something I think is kind of fun, is the context that the feeding of the 5,000 happens and how John 5 ended. Because the Gospel of John, it was supposed to, like, someone's going to sit down, they're going to explore the whole gospel at the same time. It'll take a couple hours. And so John expected chapter 6 to follow chapter 5, and that it isn't broken up kind of into a whole bunch of sermons. So it's important to understand the context of John chapter 6 and how John got there. So John 5 ends by this engagement that Jesus had in talking to holy people who had been confronting him about healing on the Sabbath and different things. And Jesus is basically claiming to be the Son of God or God. And then he confronts these people and says, you don't know Moses, so you don't know me. And that's kind of like the summary. And it's like, wait a second, I don't even know what that means. So the Hebrew people saw the first 5 books of the Bible, and they called that the Torah. And the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, they would call it the bread of God, and they would also call it the books of Moses. And so if someone dropped the idea of Moses, they are pointing to this idea of the first 5 books, the Torah, and who God is supposed to be during his time that he's here on the earth. He is supposed to have Torah pumping through his veins, how he thinks is Torah. And this prophet, who I'm going to talk about just a very tiny bit because I think it's really important here in John 5 when Jesus says, you do not know Moses, so you do not know me, because Torah is pumping through his blood. Who is this guy? So the Hebrew people saw him as a great prophet. He was a Hebrew who was born and then got adopted kind of into Egyptian priesthood through a whole series of things. He was then cast out into the desert. He climbed up Sinai, encountered God, and God told him to set the Hebrew people free. He goes back kind of into this huge place that people are enslaved, that God cares about, the children of God. And so he goes back in the place he was born into, and he says, I'm going to set these people free. And there are the 10 plagues that happen. And then he takes the Hebrew people, he parts the sea. There's this journey that they go on. They find themselves before this great hill and Sinai, and God's at the top. And then there's this idea of the prophet who goes up and down this thing, and then he'll come down and say, here's what God said, or here's what God's doing. And during this time, God is feeding his people by sending bread from heaven. And it's this idea of substance by God and the prophet. And the Hebrew people see this time as a very fond, holistic, that God pursued them. Again, it's this idea of pursuit, that God pursued them in their slavery, brought them out, parted the sea, baptism, and then puts them into the desert, and then creates this guy who's this major prophet who eventually brings down Torah that God inscribes, and he brings them down the books, right? This is a thing. And then this idea of the bread and the people being sustained. And this is the place that the Hebrew people and God had something. They had something. And so this is something that you could kind of put yourself in as a Hebrew person of thinking about the time of the prophets, the times that God was palpable, the times that the signs of the prophets and God speaking and doing things was very valuable. And so John 5 ends by Jesus saying, "You don't know Moses, so you don't know me." And so as a Hebrew person, you would put yourself in that context, thinking about the Torah, you're thinking about Sinai, you're thinking about the bread from heaven, you're thinking about the parting of the sea, you're thinking about the Hebrew king born into Egypt and then being cast out into exile. You're thinking about the 10 plagues, you're thinking about the promised land, and you're thinking about salvation for all of your people. And there's going to be a time that the prophets come back. There's this idea that the Torah isn't going to be on tablets, it's going to be in flesh and blood, and God will speak to us. You just see what I'm saying here? And so that's how John 5 ends, is he's accusing the holy people. You forgot. Okay, like that's what's happening. You forgot about Torah. You forgot the Exodus journey. You forgot. So that's how it ends. And then the story of John 6 happens. So pull out your Bibles, John 6, it's the first half. Here it is. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw signs. Hold on. So he crossed the sea, and a great crowd of people followed him. Oh, do you see a parallel? Okay. He had performed, a great crowd of people followed him because they saw signs he had performed by healing of the sick. Then Jesus went up to the mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. That also is something to circle. This is the time of Passover again. So anytime you hear Passover, it brings you back to Egypt. All right. Verse 5. When Jesus looked up and saw the great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than a half year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here's a boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but how far will they go amongst so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaf, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Nothing is to be wasted." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who came into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountainside by himself. So I'm hoping that you can begin to start to see these different things that shimmer and shine, kind of as John is telling the story of the feeding of the 5,000, because this is a very common story. Like the feeding of the 5,000 is told in tiny tots and like Bible studies, and it's typically taught from this perspective of, man, how cool is God? Or you give God your talents, and he can, cause them to go super far. And that's true. But you got to ask, is that what John is really going for here? And having been a part of this journey for 5 chapters, I think our church is beginning to understand some of the character of John and how intentional he is. And so don't forget this idea of the prophets. Don't forget this idea of the signs, and that there are 7 signs in the Gospel of John. And in that context, in the 7 signs, the feeding of the 5,000 is the centerpiece. It's the place that they all come together and they inform all, it's the aha, it's the folding, it's the everything's going to be different from this point on. The signs that have brought us here are pointing toward the feeding of the 5,000, and then the feeding of the 5,000 kind of bends in on itself and says, from this point on, you interpret everything by the Son of God has boots on the ground. So there's a lot happening at the feeding of the 5,000, especially thinking about this context that John 5 ends in, you have forgotten the prophets. You have forgotten Torah. You have forgotten, so of course you have no idea who I am. There's a lot going on there. You forgot. And it's easy to forget that God is a God who pursues. God is a God who chases, that the one you are trying to find is trying to find you. There's something really beautiful about that. And Jesus is standing right in front of them going, I'm right here. And then the feeding of the 5,000 happens. So there's this huge crowd of people who follow Jesus across the Sea of Galilee because they have seen the signs and they have seen his healings. They have seen what he's doing. This is like the pinnacle. He is popular. He's doing things. People are talking about him. People are like, we need him. We are hungry spiritually, physically. I just cross the board. Can he heal me? And so you have to think everyone here in this place has probably something that if they're 100% sure that they could be healed on, they're going to and then you think about a whole country. Here's someone who could actually heal everybody. So there's this huge crowd of people who has seen and heard the things that Jesus is doing, and they're going, yes, please. And so they're even going to follow him across a Sea of Galilee. And that's really beautiful. And so this whole crowd comes, and they are out on this hillside. A bunch of super cool things happen on hillsides in the gospel story. Think about that for a bit too. So they're on a hillside, and there are about 5,000 people there, or there's beyond that. But and so Jesus turns to Philip, and he says, "Hey, how should we feed all of these people?" And here's something I think is very, very fun or cool. So John goes on to explain that Jesus already had a plan, but he asked Philip this to test him. So pause button here on this idea of testing. To test what is happening in this context, and then how is this happening in this form of discipleship? Because I don't think Jesus is trying to expose Philip as being an idiot, right? He's trying to help Philip see. And Philip and the disciples have been a part of John chapter 5. This whole you have forgotten, I'm going to help you see, right? And then the thing that they're trying to say, okay, so if you are who you say you are, okay, it's that kind of thing. So Jesus is here, and he's asking Philip a question in hopes of inspiring and teaching and getting an answer. It isn't to shame Philip. So you do not shame Philip because he has a bad answer, right? He was a participant in this holy experiment. So he asked Philip, how should I feed all these people? And then he thinks very practically, and I think that's okay. There's a ton of people who think practically, especially people who forget about the incredible things that the prophets have done. So he thinks very practically, and he's like, man, Jesus, there's a lot of people here. Like, can you even imagine feeding all these people? It would take forever to pay for just a bite for all of these people to eat food. Here's the thing. Was Jesus asking Philip, how should I feed these people? It's very easy to say, of course he was. That's what he asked. But I believe the thing he was asking Philip is, who do you think I am? Why am I crying? I have no idea. He was asking, who do you say I am? Like throughout these 5 chapters, throughout our journey, who am I to you? Right? And so the fact that this question had been asked, how do I feed these people? Do you see me as a human being, or do you see me as the prophet, or do you see me as God on the face of the earth? Who do you see me as? And how Philip answered had been this very practical, all right, so as a helper here, as human beings kind of like trying to get things done here, here's our best course that can happen. And I really don't think it's really practical and that's what Philip did. All right, so I'm going to hit the pause button here because I think that Philip simply forgot. And that's okay, because during this time period, I'm someone who proverbially forgets everything. As soon as someone comes and says, hey, can I have helped you? I'll be like, yes, but I'm going to forget. So you're going to have to tell me before it happens. Call me, text me. And so I think it's all right for people to forget things, and especially for Philip, who's put on the spot by God himself. You know what I'm saying? But there's this passage before going any further at all that I'm dying to bring in, because for us to engage this passage of the feeding of the 5,000, it is good for us to go back to things that have been forgotten, right? And some of the things that have been forgotten are in the prophets, and they're buried deep in there. For instance, the book of 2 Kings, it's probably been a super long time since some of you have been in the book of 2 Kings, and there's this passage that to teach the story of the feeding of 5,000, this story in the 2 Kings is pretty important. So here it is. A man from Bashal Shalai, or a city hard to pronounce, bringing the man of God 20 loaves of barley bread, baked from the first ripe grain, along with some heads of new grain. Give it to the people to eat, Elisha said. How can I set this before 100 men? Asked his servant. Elisha answered, give it to the people to eat, for this is what God says. They will eat and have some left over. Then he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over, according to the word of the Lord. So in 2 Kings, there's this group of 100 people. They are an army, and they are starving. And there's this guy who comes up to the prophet Elisha and says, all I have is this barley bread. And then the prophet says, go and set it before the army. And the guy says, well, no. How am I going to set this before 100 people? And then the prophet says, go and do it, and they will have extra. And that is exactly the thing that happened. And that is the only time barley bread is talked about in the Old Testament. It's this idea of barley bread, the first fruits and first grains being put together. It's kind of like a barley bread is like the shape of a pita. They aren't that big. They're for poor people. It's barley bread. I don't know. So anyway, there's a story in 2 Kings of the prophet who took barley bread and he set it before an army of 100 people, and they ate and were full and had extra. Okay. So this is important. This is in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 42 through 44. That's in there. So go back, check it out. And so remember who God is supposed to be during this time. Like the prophets incarnate, the Torah incarnate, flesh and bone and blood and the signs of the prophets. So John 5, you don't know me because you don't know the Torah. You don't know me because you forgot the prophets. You don't know me because you forgot. And so he's bringing people here. They cross the Sea of Galilee. There's a ton of hungry people. He turns to Philip to test him. Why? Because he just got done saying, here's who I am. Here's what I'm doing. You don't see me because you forgot the prophets. So the test is, do you remember the prophets? Okay, so Philip is like, here's the answer. It'd be very expensive to feed all these people. Andrew. Okay, so historically, here's something cool about Andrew. So Philip, Andrew, and Peter are from the same hometown. So in the Bible, anytime that he pops up, there's simply Philip is there and Peter's there also. Like they hang out together. They have the same vocabulary, same upbringing. They probably grew up together. So that's just kind of a fun side note. So Philip is being tested by Jesus. How should we feed these 5,000 people? I don't know. It's going to be expensive. Then Andrew, if the question is, do you remember the prophets? Do you see me? Do you know who I am? Then Andrew says, here's a boy who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Barley loaves comes back, and all of a sudden, everything begins to shimmer if you're Jewish. Because the only time that you have heard of barley loaves is in 2 Kings. So here's something that I just want to kind of hug at this point in time. It's typically, at this point, so Andrew is coming, and he's really skeptical, and here's all the food that is here. It's like, there's probably tons of food out there. People have prepared. People have been hiking. People bring food. This is their culture. And so it isn't like there are 5,000 people out there and the only person who has bread or fish is this boy who only has these 5 pita breads. That there are other options out there. I'm sure of it. And so as I engage this text, the heart posture of Philip versus the heart posture of Andrew is very different. So do you remember what the prophets did? Because I come bearing that same Holy Spirit, the cloud parting descended on my baptism type of, thing. And do you remember, do you know who I am? Who do you say I am? Philip, how do the prophets feed these people? Right? That's what's going on here. Do you see? I don't know. That'd be very expensive. Andrew, man, his hope. You got to remember the Hebrew people. They are hoping for something soon. They are hoping for the signs of the prophets. And it was like he saw the test and he threw the test back. That's how I see it. Because out of everything out there, he's searching the barley loaves. And so you picture, Jesus there claiming to be who he's claiming to be. Then Andrew saying, I think I've got it. And so he brings this boy and says, this boy has 5 barley loaves. As if there's this secret connection, and you can almost feel Jesus going, darn right. That's barley loaves. I do things with barley loaves. And there's something there. And the fact that there's 5, that's important too, especially after coming from the end of John 5 and this idea of Torah and the 5 loaves of bread and the 5 books of Torah. Like, come on. And so these barley loaves are given for the first time since 2 Kings. And then Jesus takes the barley loaves and blesses them and says, pass them out to everyone who is hungry and collect the extras. It is like he is quoting 2 Kings, like, collect the extras. There'll be plenty left over. And at that point in time, you have to think about the group of people that is hovered here, and they are hearing, because the Jewish people are the experts on the Torah and the prophets, and and they know this. And so as he is speaking, this idea of Torah incarnate and prophet incarnate, and oh my gosh, what is happening? And then there's these baskets of bread, and you got to picture the 12 disciples are going out and they dig their arms in and they're passing and they put them out and passing and passing and passing. And you have to think about the hearts of the disciples in this moment, right? Like, that would just be fun to participate in, because they are participating in a story that they had heard about that happened in 2 Kings. It's like 2 Kings is happening right now. It's like the time of the prophets is right now. It's like it's happening right now. And all the signs pointed towards this, but it's actually happening. And then you got to think about from the posture of the people in the crowd, because you got to think they didn't have a PA system at this time. Like, the conversations that happened between Jesus and Philip and Jesus and Andrew and the boy and all the things, they didn't hear it. There's 5,000 people hoping to be healed. There's 5,000 people hoping to just grasp onto something. They are hunting God, right? Like, that whole posture I brought up in the beginning, if we can just catch a glimpse of him, maybe we can. And there are baskets overflowing of food for them that is being passed out. And they have no idea where it comes from. Like, there are people in this crowd who has no idea what has happened, and they are participating in like the apex experience of God on earth, and they don't have any idea. They're just hungry. And God feeds them. And that is the grace of God to all of us who do not see, we do not understand, we don't know. We just know that we are really hungry. But God has already made the table. God has already prepared the bread. God has already had a plan before he asked Philip, how do we feed all these people? He already knew. There's something really cool about that. There are some of us here in the space and like, just saying, it's so cool who he is, but I am in a really, really broken, hungry, destroyed place, and everything is falling apart, and I just want to touch his cloak and be healed. If I could just catch his glance for 10 seconds. But it seems that the God that you are trying to find has been trying to find you all along. And he just invites you to sit down in the grass and eat the bread that he already had prepared for you before you even got there. That is a brilliant thing. Furthermore, there's this idea of some of us that are like, man, I'm just dying to do things for Jesus. I'm dying to be, to help people and to bring healing and prayer. And I'm just dying to be used, and I'm dying to have purpose. And I'm dying, but it's going to be pretty expensive to do that. I don't know how this is all going to be. Like, the heartbeat of Philip, grace and peace to him. Like, I love him because that's how I think. But then there's the heart of Andrew that's like, man, if you are who you say you are, and you better be, I am cashing in because I have heard the stories of the great prophets. And if you are who you say you are going to do incredible things. And the whole time, Jesus is having this perspective of, do they see me? Do they see me? Do they see the God who is like pursuing them hard? I am on full display. I'm going from town to town. I'm bringing healing. And I didn't just go from town to town. I came from heaven to earth. I have journeyed towards people hard. I'm speaking their vocabulary. I'm in their skin. I'm with them. Do they see me? Who do you say I am? And there's a lot in that test. And they are fed bread by the hand of God. And you would have to think throughout this whole journey that the whole story begins to shimmer for these people who crossed the Sea of Galilee. Because towards the end, people, their eyes begin to open up and they say, surely he is the prophet. And biblically, these are in caps. The prophet. It's the prophet to end all prophets. It's it is him. It is. Circle the prophet. Surely it is him. And it causes this fear for Jesus that they are going to turn him into a king by force. And I think there's something really beautiful about that passage, because it's a big passage, because it causes Jesus to go to a mountain again by himself. Who else would actually do that to go encounter God? And so he just gets done feeding these 5,000 people, these 5 barley loaves turned into, they all ate and they were full. It isn't like they just had bites. They were full. They were burping and they couldn't go anywhere, like bellies full. And then they come back and have 12 full baskets. Some people say this is like the poetry of the 5 books of Torah all of a sudden shattered and put together and expanded into 12 baskets in abundance and 12 tribes and 12 disciples to the ends of the... See, there's a lot there in these 12 baskets of bread. But as people saw this, it caused Jesus to see that they are going to turn me into a king by force. And understandably so, because think about the times of people who encounter God, or the times that you have encountered God, or catched a glimpse, or grabbed his cloak, or had a God encounter, or there was something that was really profound to you. Tell me the thing that from a human perspective that you try to do, or what I do. I try to own that. I own it and recreate it, or suck it dry, or do it over and over and over again, or I force him to be things that he potentially does not have any intention of being. Has Jesus, has the Bible, has our faith oftentimes become something by force at the hands of human beings that God didn't ever have an intention for it to be at all. So instead of this idea that Jesus is going in the provision of the prophets as the Son of God, and there's a path that is paved, it is the intention of people, as they said, oh my gosh, it is him, to capture him and put a crown on him and put him on a human throne and say, he is going to perform our agenda. And he says, no, I'm going up to meet with God up top of Sinai. And it hadn't been Sinai, but this is the thing that the people there saw. Here is a guy who's claiming to be prophet, and they see him as prophet, and he crosses the Sea of Galilee. They follow him. They are on a hillside. They are hungry. He takes bread, blesses it, and they are fed bread. And then he goes off by himself and climbs high to experience God, who is he saying that you forgot? The same person that they forgot in John 5 at the end, because you don't know Moses, you don't know me. And so it's like he in type and shape and form and all things performs this all prophets journey of the Exodus story and putting people in it, being fed bread from heaven, crossing the sea, being sustained, and then going, wow, I am seen by God himself. And then him saying, you cannot own me. It's time for me to go. I think there's something really, really beautiful about this idea, first of all, of who do you say he is? Because if you really believed that Jesus is God, I mean, like really believed, how would everything be different for you? I mean, like picture yourself being Philip and Andrew, okay? Because I think like our typical answers to things are the answers that Philip gives. It's the practical. It's I don't expect too much. I'm here for it. I get the idea, but if you really believed, like from the essence of your soul, that Jesus is who he says he is, how would the answers you give be completely different? What would it be like to be like Andrew? Like to have that the hope of Andrew, the faith of Andrew, the experience of Andrew, the challenge of Andrew, this idea of like, man, I think I see where you're going. So in those times that there is a desire that's dropped in your heart, that it isn't the Philip thing of like, oh man, that's really expensive. I don't know how I'm going to practically make this. Or, man, I think where you're going. Because I've seen this story play out before. And are you calling me? Because if you're calling me, I'm about to participate in something really incredible. What would it be like to be the people in the crowd who are just honest and say, I just need bread today. I'm just hungry today and I'm broken and I'm just hoping to catch a glimpse of him. I really can't hear him. To you, that is a-okay because there is plenty of bread to go on forever. The big question I go home and think about is how do I engage who I am and who he is after I've experienced him? Do I give Jesus the ability to go off so I can follow him? Or do I have the desire to put him kind of in shackles so I can put a crown on him and put him there on a throne so he can do the things that I have a desire for him to do? There's this practical heartbeat of like, do I have the desire to follow Jesus? Because from this point on in John chapter 6, this is all about this idea of discipleship and going forward. There is a following that takes place. Do you have a desire to follow Jesus or just to simply point at him and say, I was there? So that's our engagement for today. I pray that you have seen things that you have not seen. I pray that you have heard things that you have not heard. I pray that there's this idea that has begun to shift for you, that the God that you have been pursuing is pursuing you. Sit in the grass, eat bread. This is the best place you could possibly be. Lord, thank you for preparing places for us in all the places we are at this point in time. Jesus, thank you for being a God who pursues, speaks our vocabulary, goes after us, tests us, gives us opportunity, feeds us bread, brings us back from the dead, heals us, causes us to see, causes us to hear. Thank you for being a God who is doing the same things that you have been doing since the very beginning. Help us to be in awe by the journey you've invited us on and seeing things that we have never seen before. In Christ I pray, amen.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this conversation part. KJ, thank you for that. So I want to start off by saying how inspiring and refreshing it is to go through a passage that if you've been, a Christian for a while, if you've been around the church for a while and you're so familiar, but how much to be uncovered and discovered, and the depth that you brought today, that was incredible. I'm like doing all sorts of research and going deeper into, what all you inspired me to think and all the things that I want to go from here. But
I agree, Mariana,
Yes.
because I think there are at least like several significant things that I hadn't really thought about before, and that's inspiring because you listen to a message and you think, well, yeah, it's a really well-known passage, but after this message, there are some things I want to go back and look at again because I feel like, wow, yeah, that was really helpful. That was interesting. That was inspiring. And so
Yeah.
thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, I think so many people have a hard time. Like, well, you still hear people that will say, "Oh, did Jesus really actually say he was God? He never said I am God." But it's all these stories that have so much revelation that each story that we go through, it's the proof that he is God. And if you just don't pay attention, it's easy to miss it. And it's amazing to understand all the links to what was happening.
I agree.
And
I agree. Yeah, I'd like to just jump in because I was
Yes.
thinking this whole response between Philip and Andrew and how that's different. I think that's very intriguing to me. And bringing out just that, Philip comes and he says, well, here's the mathematical equation of what we have in front of us. It either works or it doesn't work. And frankly, Jesus, it's not going to work.
Right.
So there's that response. And then there's the response of Andrew.
Right.
And this is something so intriguing to me. It's like Andrew is listening and he's seeing the situation. And I really think that there was something going on in his mind. You could just see it working. And I'd never thought of it like this. I was like, wow, Second Kings, barley. I'm going to go look through all these thousands of people and find somebody who's got barley loaves and come with barley loaves.
because we've seen that multiplied in the past.
Yeah. And he was really thinking biblically. It's like, I'm going to allow the Torah to inform my response to Jesus. And that is beautiful. And that's how we as Christians need to live, because we are constantly doing the math about everything or the science behind everything instead of allowing the Bible to inform and to determine how we're going to respond. So,
Right.
yeah.
I love that. I think there were those 2 points that you make. I'm sorry, I want to ask you questions too, but
Yeah, but go for
the
it.
things that I was sitting on was these 2 instances where we make it about us, right?
Yeah.
Philip and Andrew, he's like, well, here's what I can do, or even I'm gonna impress Jesus on how, like, Jesus, I did the math. It would take this much money. It would take this much work, and aren't you so proud how I could figure out myself? It's the answer is that it's impossible, but I think it's all about me rather than it's all about him. But then at the end, when you bring that they wanted to make him king, like it's their agenda, it's all what they want. I was
Yeah,
just,
that's really.
oh my gosh, there was so much being uprooted in my mind of life, how often our instinct response is what's my own capacity, what's my thinking, what's my agenda, what's my expectation compared to having the biblical perspective, but what is Jesus here to do, or what is he doing compared to when you said that, like they want to put a crown on his head. It's even painful to hear, but so true in so many things in our
That
life.
just indicates that we fall into this trap regularly of wanting to manipulate God into our plans. instead of following him. And the definition of discipleship is following Jesus, as you mentioned. And I think that's where at that last point that you're making, Mariana, it's like, wow, do I want to follow Jesus, or am I wanting Jesus to follow me in my direction and in my plans? So that was another really helpful kind of point for me. I think there's great application coming out of this passage.
Right.
How did you feel about it, KJ? Yeah.
I know. I do want to say one more thing, because I love that it's not about shaming, like what you said about Philip.
Oh, yeah, there was a
But
point
it's
there.
that inspiration of, do you see who I am? And Jesus' question. So it's not like, oh, Dudley, I can't believe you're still doing that just like Philip, or me. No, it's like Jesus is inviting us. Do you see? Look, guys, do you see? Look who I am. And that's, thank you, Jesus.
And I think it's cool that is a perpetual thing. I mean, like, that happens till the very end for all of the Gospels. It's like he's at the end. It's like, do you see me now? And they're like, nope. Nope, I don't know. You know,
How about
and
now? Still no.
like there are even times following the time that he came back from the dead, he's standing in front of him, and they're like, I don't know.
Let me
How
touch
about
and
you
make sure.
give us some hints?
Yes.
How about you give us some hints? You know, and I think that brings just like a ton of comfort of like to be a disciple of Jesus. I do not have to 100% understand or buy in, or I mean, I don't know, like, because the actual physical disciples, they are simply defined by they follow him.
Yeah.
And the answers that they give sometimes are really bad ones.
Yeah, they didn't get it right all the time.
Exactly.
And
They're
there
a
was
little
so much
wishy-washy
grace.
at times.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like the point for Jesus hadn't been to get the answers. The point had been for them to continue to follow. And I think there's something really cool in that.
Yeah.
Something that you didn't get, I know there was so much that you said, I didn't even go here and there. And if there's anything that you would like to bring up, this is a great opportunity. But one thing that you told me off camera that you didn't go to that part was that this was the first time Jesus actually invited them to sit.
Yeah.
And I think that is just that in itself is like, here's a crowd. How would we respond if there's this crowd and everybody wants to see things and, you know, it's your time to shine? It's like, well, let's stop and sit.
Yeah, it's kind of like how I picture it. I mean, I'm a very like visual kind of guy, and I just picture people that are hurting and they're just dying to be healed, and they're bringing people to be healed, and they're not here like to hear him, or like we're here to hear a sermon. Like it's like that they have seen the signs, they've seen him healed, and like he is growing, and like just the people elbowing and like trying to get in, you know, like I kind of feel that, and like people, it's hot and sweaty, and I don't know, I just don't see a whole bunch of like holy people being calm set for church. And
it's desperate people needing help.
Yeah,
that's what I think.
Yeah, desperate people needing help. And I mean, in the text it says there was plenty of grass. And like,
is it like Psalm 23? Is that what you're picturing?
I do. I go there. I probably, but I couldn't put that in a sermon. But that's the place I go. There's in John intentionally says there was plenty of grass, and Jesus told the disciples to tell the crowd to sit. And I just think there's so much beauty in that posture, especially because so in the other Gospels, so as Jesus does his Sermon on the Mount, it's the same thing. There was plenty of grass on the hillside, and Jesus sat down. And it seems that incredible things happen from this posture of sitting in the grass, compared to the angry I'm gonna fight for things posture.
So what about?
I don't know.
What
It's coming from this
I'm
place
starting
of
just
rest
thinking
and
a little bit out loud, but this is the scene sitting in the grass. The beginning says it's taking place at Passover,
Yeah, yeah.
which takes us back to Egypt.
Right.
And after the Passover, they're wandering in a wilderness.
Right.
I mean,
Which
they're in
was
a
not
wilderness
grassy.
setting, but not grassy, but it's this sense of like lostness and being rushed here and rushed there and acting here and doing this and doing that and getting lost here and getting lost there. And it's a very different kind of situation at the time of the Passover now. Yeah, so I was just thinking about the contrast. If we don't forget the Torah,
Right.
but we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
But it's so beautiful, bringing back to all the symbolisms that you're talking about, how the people were fed bread in the
Yeah.
desert and Jesus is feeding them bread,
and later in this chapter, he is the bread of
Yeah.
life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so fun because I almost like have how I like feel it. So it isn't just a symbol to him. Like he is doing it. He had been there. And so it's kind of like, do you see me? Do you see what I'm doing? Who do
Yeah,
you think
yeah.
I am? Like
Yeah.
I think that's this question that's very silent behind the whole text. It's, do you see me now? Do you see me now? Be- because following this text, the story that follows, it's the story of the healing of the blind man.
In John 9, yeah.
Sneak peek for next week.
I mean,
Couple weeks away, but
that's the thing.
Yeah.
So how the gospel had been intended to be experienced had been, I'm going to sit down.
Right.
I'm going to start at the beginning and I'll go
Yes.
to the end. It didn't have the intention of being broken up. And
Right.
so following this, I am seeing the Exodus story. I'm seeing things I have never seen before. I'm seeing Second Kings. I'm seeing all the prophets like beginning to pop up. Oh my gosh, he's the prophet. I am seeing things.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, it's
blind man's being healed. I am the blind man. I'm seeing the forest of trees. Like, what is going on
yeah.
at the pool?
Right.
You know, like it's just like
Back to the pool.
back to
Back
the
to the
pool.
pool.
And
Yeah,
so
there you
it's
go.
just like, so I hope, I mean, if it's that the overall just fun, the fun of experiencing the biblical text, I hope that's coming across because it is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. These are not dry words just to read quickly and
Oh,
check
goodness,
off on a
no.
box.
Yeah.
So
But-
I want to bring this up because when you preached last time and you laid out on the board all the 7 signs and how this is the middle of the chiasm, and you mentioned the pool, the symbolism with the baptism. So if we have a minute to maybe, you said how back then you said how
Sacramental
this point.
meal. Yeah.
Can you just refresh us on this being the epicenter of all the signs?
Yeah. So how? So a chiasm. So it's a form of Hebrew poetry that that there are parts of the Bible that are these chiastic experiences. There are some people who will say that the entire Bible is a chiasm, and that's kind of fun. And so it's this idea that how it's going to begin is how it's going to end, and then the second thing in is going to inform the second to the ending, and then the third, and then the fourth, and then there's this pivotal point that there's a turning that helps you inform all of the stories that have happened are informed by the things that are to follow, and that apart from the other half of the chiasm, it's half of the experience, it's half of the truth. It's hard to explain, but But for a Hebrew chiasm, that there's the turning point. It's like this centerpiece that does not have to be informed by something else. It like spells it out. It's like, hey, idiot.
And it's
I'm gonna spell it out for you. If you don't see this, just put the book down and go somewhere else. Like that's how it feels. And so the feeding of the 5,000, it is that pivotal point. It's like, hey, I'm gonna spell it out, and from this point on, the things that follow are going to inform everything else that I've said, and the things that I've said are going to be a poetic expression of everything that's to come. So expect there to be the baptismal vats that are empty and then filled and then turned into wine. That's going to happen again. Expect the healing of the official son and someone coming back from the dead, because that's going to happen again. Expect someone who's paralyzed to get up and walk, because that type of healing, it's going to happen again. And so that's the thing that John's doing on the second half, but from a whole other perspective.
Which we're entering in now.
Which we're into, because your perspective is, oh, I was so blind before, I didn't see. Surely he is the prophet who has fed us bread. And then, so.
There you go.
That's so good. Yeah, I love it. So this is the
center. It's a centerpiece. But I mean, it's very easy, to bring in the whole symbol, and people often do and say, so at this point, I mean, like, Jesus is breaking bread. He is breaking, like, so it is the type and shape kind of him breaking his body, and passing it out for 5,000 people and multiplying it, 12 baskets, 12 tribes going out, like his body is for everyone.
Which goes back to John 1, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, everyone.
And so it's very easy to go there. So again, there's just a ton of, I mean, someone could do a sermon on the feeding of the 5,000 for every Sunday until the end of time, and it's going to be different because
there's a lot to cover.
So, absolutely.
One of the points that you're making, I'd like to just kind of like reiterate, is we can read that story in John 6 and identify with Philip and Andrew in the story, but John is writing this gospel, and he has people that he's intending, his community of people. So there's the second level, and we sometimes miss that second level of person, the people that are reading the story that John is writing. They're not Philip and Andrew, but they're the people that are living with John, and he's teaching every Sunday or every day, and so there's that level that I think is valuable to keep in mind. So,
all right, I got to ask you something here, and it's just like a personal opinion on things that can't be academic because you can't prove it. It's all like speculation. But the Gospel of John, he always kind of he talks about himself quite a lot. Like he'll call himself the
beloved,
the boy. There was a boy in the garden, and people speculate that he was talking about himself, that he was the boy in the garden. And so I also have heard people speculate that the only gospel that talks about there being a boy is in the Gospel of John, as far as the feeding of 5,000. And some people say that that they believe the boy had been John.
Oh.
Have you ever heard this?
No, I've never heard that or thought about that.
Yeah, I was.
Okay, maybe I'll go back and look at it.
I'm like, okay, let's look it up.
Of course you can't prove
it. The feeding of the 5,000 does appear in all four Gospels.
Correct.
Yes,
It's
the only story.
But how it's told is so different. It's the only Gospel that talks about the barley loaves. So
The
in
other ones
the
that
other
say
ones,
breads?
Yep, it's just
Okay.
Just bread. Uh-huh.
bread. So it's the only gospel that the fish that's talked about. So it's like these cut up hunks of fish compared to the other gospels. It's like a whole fish.
Like instead of a dried fish, it's like pickled fish.
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. It's these hunks of fish that are in John, but in the other ones, it's like there's a fish. And so he has these things that are kind of fun to explore.
Right.
So
Do you think, obviously, they were all there?
who was all there?
The
12.
disciples,
Yeah.
the writers of the Gospels, right? They all, oh, no, that's not true. Luke. No, hold on. Mark, am I lying here?
Luke and Mark are not there.
Hold on.
Yeah, I was
Forget
like,
that part. No.
But
Forget
the 12,
this.
I
the
think it's
12
time
are
for us
there.
to end this.
The 12.
I was thinking of Matthew.
Yeah.
Forget my point.
Okay.
The thing is, they know the story, okay?
Yeah.
Why, the question is, why does John bring up these things? And I think one of the things that I speculate is because he was the last one and he had told this story how many times, and the things that the points that he was able to connect, like, oh my gosh, this is like this. Don't you think that he spent the rest of his life looking back?
I don't know. It's possible, 100%.
Because you can't possibly pick up on everything that is happening in front of you, even for us,
right.
as it's happening. A lot of times it takes going in,
Yeah.
the
I also
go back
future,
and think about
and
it.
then
Yeah.
you think about it. He was the last one to write.
Yes, I get that. I also think, so depending on the person I'm talking to, how I tell a story is going
True.
to be very different. And like, I'm going to say the same story, but sometimes I'm going to
highlight
bring out
the-
things
yes.
that I didn't bring out the other time. Sometimes
true.
I'm going to ask this part to take a seat. Sometimes, and like, I think that's the thing that John is doing. He's being very intentional to the audience that he is talking
Right.
to,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
trying to truly like engage a specific people group who
Right.
are going to hone in on specific details. And I think the other gospels have a whole other audience, whole different points, and like going in and
Another
sharing those things,
purpose.
it is not important.
Yeah.
It's just, it does not serve.
Yeah.
It
The
takes
purpose
us
of that
back to Mariana's sermon, I don't know, several weeks ago from John, when you mentioned John 20, 30, and 31, the purpose statement of John. You know, these signs in order that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life in his name. That's part of John's purpose, or that is his purpose statement. And so he is telling the story to keep pointing people back
Yeah.
to who Jesus is.
And I think that's a great point for us to finish our time, because you end with that question: what would it be different if we really believed? So if the whole point is that
Man.
we believe.
Isn't that huge though?
Yes.
I mean, it's so easy to say, oh yeah, I believe, but everything I do, I'm Philip.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah,
like everything.
yeah.
It's just like, wow.
How would
I'm hungry to be a disciple of someone like I truly believe is the Son of God.
Yep. So
Wow,
there you go.
good, thanks.
Thank you guys for joining us during this time. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Till next time.